There you go.
Okay, we're off. Yes, Jamie Costin. Thanks ever so much for joining me today for this reflections interview. And the great thing about this is both as an athlete and as a coach. But how are things with you at the moment, Jamie?
Things are good, Bashir. I think I was telling you there earlier, you're lucky you got me today. I've had my first shave in about 4 months, cut my hair. My wife was sick looking at me, so I was looking like a Yeti, I'd say, about 3 days ago, and I'm looking a lot tighter than I was last week. So it's probably good we did it this week instead of next week, or last week.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of people who look like Yetis across Ireland right now, and I know this lockdown has dragged on a little bit. But you're working as a dairy farmer down in Waterford.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's like it's the start of April. We've had the last 8 weeks of just being fairly relentless. So we've had a lot of cows calf. I've been up all night most nights, so I'm sort of just trying to recover now. In my recovery period, we had the overload of training for the last 2 months, and now we're trying to take it a bit easier on the other side.
Wow, yeah. But you know, looking back on your career, I mean, 3-time Olympian, that's a heck of a legacy. And now you're coaching, and you've got athletes qualified for the Olympics. So we've got an awful lot to talk about, an awful lot to reflect upon. And if I can just kick off this with how you started in athletics. How did it all begin for Jamie?
My dad was an athlete. So he was running back in the 50s and 60s, and he had to leave school when he was 12 and work on the farm because his own dad was sick. So he was pretty much running a farm and an athlete, a runner at the same time. He actually did some race walking events in the early 70s. But he was a good athlete. He'd have been winning Munster cross country titles and stuff like that. But when John Tracy finished second in LA in 1984, John was part of our club back in the day. So my dad would have been one of the coaches in the club with Father Michael Enright back in the late 60s, early 70s. And they started up a running club again. So himself and 5 or 6 other guys that were in the running club back in the 50s and 60s, it had sort of died out in the 70s. And in September 1984, they started up Ringwood Parish Athletic Club. And as a 7-year-old, that's how I got introduced to athletics. It was in the house.
Yeah, get you out of the house. And I guess being on the farm, you're always an active youngster anyway. So
yeah, that's sort of one of the benefits. You don't realise it when you're growing up on a farm, but I was used as the dog. So basically, I was sent to get animals, bring them back, and running like pretty much cross country course all my life as a kid. So you didn't realise you were training, but you were training, you know. So it was a very, very good base to have as a child.
Absolutely, yeah. And did you start in walking? I mean, you've mentioned cross country, so I'm assuming you started there and gradually transitioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would have been running, jumping, throwing like everybody else, and walking was just like race walking was part of the culture in the club. There was race walkers, you know, whether you're doing long jump or race walking or sprinting or cross country, it was all one really, you know. So for me, I just took to it. I was good at it, and I enjoyed the technical sort of aspect of it, like, you know.
Gotcha. And in terms of your progress as a, I suppose, as a either a runner or a thrower or a jumper, how was that in comparison to, I guess, your progress and your performances in walking in the initial stages? I mean, was it a case of sampling and then moving into walking?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. To sample everything. So I started race walking when I was about 12 or 13, and would have won a nationals that year. And I'd have been a good middle distance runner, but not the best. So for me, it was like, and at 12 or 13, it's a moot point really, isn't it? Because everybody develops at different stages. So I enjoyed running and race walking. I played hurling, I played basketball, played badminton, played everything as a kid, you know. So I did all sports. But for me, once I got into race walking, I had the challenge of it. I sort of like there.
Gotcha. And with that, I mean, was it a quicker progress with race walking? And when did you, when did you realise you could become an international athlete? At what stage did that happen?
Would have happened quick enough. Like, but the thing is for me, I was just enjoying doing all sports, and so bit by bit, when you're winning nationals, it keeps you enticed to keep on going. You know.
Sure. So what age were you when you won your first national title?
12 or 13.
Right. In race walking?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess that's sowed the seeds for a potential international future. I mean, did you think that at 13 that you could represent Ireland at the Olympics?
When I was 7 years of age, I was watching John Tracy racing in LA, and I decided that day there was going to be an Olympic. I was up. My parents were actually in LA at the Olympics, and I was staying with my aunt and uncle above in Offaly, and they woke me up at 10 or 11 o'clock at night every time the race was on it, and I was the only kid in the house. They woke up, saw that race, and I was out running. I was out running on the roads the next day. So for me, from when I was a kid, that's all I wanted to do.
Right. And John Tracy was one of your big influences in getting you on
Yeah,
the path.
100%.
Good. So thinking about how you progressed in your race walking, I mean, was it all race walking, or was it part running, part race walking? How did that develop, and what kind of percentages did you give out to running, race walking initially? Or
So I'd say, so what I did is I started specializing when I got to 17 years of age. Up till then, I was running, say, run cross country, and I started training for walking in spring for the indoors. But I could have been playing other sports all the time, hurling, football, badminton, whatever sports I'm doing. I used to play music. So like my days were fairly full as a kid, but they were full of loads of different things, So for me, I think it was about 17, I did 10K in just outside the world junior qualifying time when I was 17 years of age, like 20 seconds beside it. And that was when I said, well, if I'm going to get the World European Juniors, I need to specialize, be more specific in my training. And that's sort of 17 years of age when I went for the best.
And when you say at 17, would that mean that that's when you transitioned more of your training to, well, certainly you said race specific work, but does that mean that all of your training was race walking and you did no running, or was it?
No, half and half. There was hurling training, football training. There was all sorts of training all the time.
And really,
there was no real plan.
Yeah.
At that stage. So basically, we had coaches in the club, but they were just club coaches, and there was no, like, I got to European Juniors or World Juniors off of pretty much a very basic training plan with very little expertise. And I suppose that's one of the main reasons I'm going this year, because I had to learn myself as an athlete. So there wasn't the expertise in the country. There wasn't anybody I trusted enough to say, yeah, I'm going to give you the plan. Like, I worked with Con Hartley for a couple of years. He used to be Jimmy McDonald's coach. Con's a brilliant man, and he helped me a lot as a junior. When I got to the senior stage, I sort of there was myself and my buddy Pierce O'Callaghan, and Rob Heffron was coming. He was just 6 months behind me, and the three of us Rob worked with McLean for a few years, but for myself and Pierce, we sort of worked on our own. And like I remember the first thing I would have done is European Juniors the night after the race. I got the Russian coach and athlete, and they didn't speak English. I didn't speak Russian, but we sat down at the bar. I bought them a few drinks, and I got them to write down what his training was. So that was from day one. That's what we were doing. I was hungry for knowledge. I was curious. I wanted to be good at what I was doing, and I wanted to find out what the best people were doing. So obviously the Russians take the doping to one side. At 18 years of age, I didn't really think about anything like that, but he was one of the best walkers in the world. So I said, I'll sit him down and ask him questions. And that's pretty much, we followed that philosophy or that plan all the way through to, like, in 2001, myself and Rob and Julian O'Sullivan went to South Africa with Robert Parsonowski. And that's pretty much where the knowledge of how to be a high performance athlete, that's where it really started. But up from say 95 till 2001, pretty much asking everybody I met, whether it was Mexicans or Russians or Germans or whoever, anybody I met at a race, I'd be asking their training.
Yeah, no.
That's how we did it. It's not a conventional way of trying to become a coach or trying to learn. That's how we did it. It's like going, you're good, I want to be good. What do you do?
Yeah. No, and really, what I'm trying to get at now is people watching this who are thinking about, oh, maybe I might give walking a go, but it's how the transition goes and how it evolved for you. And looking back at, I guess, 13, 14, when you were winning top, national titles. When you first started race walking, what was the technical challenge that you found most difficult to deal with? And I'm thinking at that age, you still had a growth spurt to come, so that might have added additional challenges. What was your experience?
I think the most important thing is to not think about it too much. Because walking is natural, it's a natural movement of the body. Race walking is a natural movement of the body. If you get 20 kids online and you get them to say, walk towards me as quick as you can, don't run, you'll get at least 10 of them will move directly into the race walking technique. At least half of them. It's a natural movement between walking and running. It's how you can walk really quick. That's why it's a sport. And for me, I didn't think about it, but there's nothing to think about. I just did it and I was able to do it. And like, obviously we observe correct technique, and the most important thing was to make sure that you're walking technically correct. And that's by doing things slowly, building your technique, and step by step, once you have a natural technique and you're able to do race walking, you won't unlearn it. It's like getting on a bike.
Well, it's certainly, it's poetry in motion when these guys are flowing at 5-minute miles, and keeping that going for a long time, which is impressive for a lot of runners. But obviously the top tier of race walkers, they go a heck of a lick. And I mean, what's your best time for 10k race walking?
Or 39:09.
And that's good club running, that, so and that would that would certainly certainly have you up there in a lot of 10k races across Ireland.
It was a good time that day as well, but the problem was I got bloody beaten by Rob. Rob did 39:01, so I didn't even win the nationals during that time. So that's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah. But the good thing is about you and Rob being together is I dare say you pushed each other through your careers. First for national titles, and then as we've seen, for international titles as well. That's one of the great things about having a peer amongst your own. I
think Rob's slightly better than me.
Well, what's the word? We'll come back to this again, and obviously we'll chat to Robert at some stage. Any particular processes that you worked on? And I know that you said there was an element of trial and error. You committed at 17, but was there anything additional that you perhaps did at the ages of 20 and 24? Because we know that between the ages of 17 and 23, it's a real difficult time for people to transition.
I was nearly lost the sport at 20, 21 years of age, so I'd have gone to World Juniors, finished top 12, and then the following year I spent maybe 2 years where I was mostly injured. And it was very tough because there was no real support structure around then. There's no carding system at that stage. And I'd say I was very close to leaving sport because just the lack of success, the lack of guidance as such to help you through that period. For me, like process I use as an athlete, my process as a coach would be a lot based on my experience as an athlete. And I suppose the most important thing that I would have learned as an athlete was from a guy we trained with in New Zealand called Craig Barrett. And he had one of his goals, one of his strategic documents for his own plan was to achieve his potential. And I thought it was a fantastic statement. And for me as a coach, the most important thing, the thing I'm most focused on, you've all your technical side, your strength conditioning, your speed, strength endurance, speed endurance, all of that. And the most important thing for me is helping an athlete achieve their potential, whatever that potential is, and potential to be a better person, to learn more about themselves. And being a better athlete comes out of doing all of those things. So for me, that's, if you were going to distill my coaching philosophy into one sentence, it's that helping people achieve potential.
No, that's a good point, and I like the idea of the potential. It's unique to you, and I think everybody's made up of relative fast twitch to slow twitch fibers, natural flexibility, natural strength, and some will have more potential in one area and perhaps different potential in other areas. So that's a very fair point. In terms of your training, were there any particular things that you found difficult to do? And if so, how did you overcome them? And on that one, I often think of race walkers walking up hills, and I have tried a bit of race walking, and I find it particularly difficult going up hills. But I don't know, is there any aspects of training that you found difficult as you evolved?
Yes, you're always going to find different sessions difficult, but I suppose you evolve, develop, and get used to them. So I live in the coast. I live in Ring. It's a Gaeltacht down in Waterford, and there's nothing but hills. So again, like being on a farm, being reared on a farm, I was reared walking on hills or running on hills. It's just the way it was. So I didn't really think about things that way, you know. I didn't like. There's all sorts of hurdles you overcome at different stages in your career, but like when you're looking at it from any athlete versus an athlete moving from 800 to 1500, or a long jumper going to high jump, you're going to have transition periods and doing different things. And for me, I didn't really view anything as an issue. We have to do it. Let's get on with it. Let's learn how to do it and get over the hurdle.
Gotcha. And you've said that you worked it out, and you've used a few people as mentors and contemporaries like Pierce O'Callaghan, Rob Heffernan, and the Russian coaches. Did you have regular dialogue with these people as you were evolving as an athlete, particularly, at 17, 18, 19?
No, I would have had regular dialogue at that stage, but in 1998, left college, and myself and Pierce actually went to New Zealand to actually, we lived in a garage with this New Zealand race walker, Craig Barrett, who finished 8th or 9th in the World Championships year beforehand. And we pretty much, that he was our first proper mentor as such, that we were learning off of how to be, like 50K training is hard. And we sort of had we had an idea of what we need to do, but I think it gets back to being consistently going out and hitting your 60, 80, 100 miles a week, hitting your 160 Ks a week, getting out there, doing it week in, week out, not getting injured, not getting sick, being healthy. We sort of learned a lot about that from him. Like it's amazing to see how naive and raw we were even at that stage. And we were like, I was 20 years of age at that stage, but at 20, nearly 21. Yeah, we didn't have a clue how to train properly as a senior athlete, and we learned bit by bit how to do things with guys like Craig. We went to Australia the following year with Scott Nelson, another Kiwi, and Nick Ahern and Simon Baker. So we had a lot of guys that gave us knowledge, that helped us out, that were mentors along the way, that had actually been there and done it beforehand.
Gotcha. And at this stage, if you're doing 160K a week, would that have been 50% race walking, 50% running, or had the shift changed?
Full walking, yeah. So
All
like
walking.
I said, at 17 years of age, I would stop running training. I would just done walking training.
Right, okay.
And there's a lot of guys, like the thing is, there's nothing written in stone. There's a lot of guys I know who jog. I would have cycled off season, I would have done kickboxing off season, I'd have done all sorts of other stuff as well, just as cross training. But for me, when I was training, I used to just race walk,
And yeah, well, I guess at that stage, when did you hit your purple patch then? I mean, was it a couple of years of just toughing it out on these 160Ks per week? Did it take you a couple of years?
That wouldn't have been like a normal week. You do about 5,000 kilometers over the year, so you've got 100K weeks, 140K weeks. In an altitude training camp, you'd probably hit 550K in a month, so that'd be a much bigger month than, say, your November month, where you're probably only doing 350, 400 kilometers. So training was periodized. Training was done correctly to get yourself into the best possible shape for the championships at the end of the season, August.
Gotcha. And you've mentioned altitude. Was that a regular occurrence? And were you a good reactor? Because some people react very well to altitude. Some people kind of only partially react.
Yeah, well, it all depends how you go about it, So I suppose we would have been learning about training at altitude on our first time up there. So both myself and Rob, we've been training with Korzanowski. We're full of enthusiasm. 2 weeks we're flying, and then at the end of 2 weeks we get sick. Because we've gone way too hard, too early, and we learned a valuable lesson out of that. So it didn't. We made a lot of mistakes. We tried not to make the same mistake the second time. And with Korzanowski, he was coming from Eastern European training philosophy, and our training was very middle distance type training with some extra endurance in it, So it was very interesting, because we would have been brought up like one of the problems. Maybe I'm old, but for my era, it would have been go out and do 100 miles a week. Because Jerry Kieran would have been a big man for that. Everyone in Ireland being, oh, it has to be 100 miles a week. It doesn't have to be 100 miles a week. All at all. It can be whatever you need it to be. You need to develop as an athlete and build into whatever your proper training session is. But for us, we were of that mindset that you got to go hard and go hard, go early. And unfortunately, when you're on a month-long training camp, you need to be able to meet your effort out correctly over the month. And we learned that lesson, that train correctly, not train hard. You know, train hard when you need to, correct training at the correct time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I know I was chatting to somebody recently on the American collegiate system, and they say that a lot of these 18-year-olds come in and they're so enthusiastic and so keen, and I think, well, actually, you know, they do keep up with the best athletes, but they don't realise sometimes that the first year's perhaps only doing, you know, 60 miles a week, whereas the fourth years are probably up to 100 miles a week. So they've got a double day, so they can't smash their sessions. They need to recover for the next double day, the following day. So that's one of the reasons they can keep up. But invariably, the important thing is that they've got to recover. And how did you evolve your recovery so that you didn't get injured and didn't get ill?
Didn't go mad for the first camp.
That was a key one.
You learn as you go along, Bashir. You know, it's like, and we made mistakes, like we try not to repeat the same mistakes again. And like we had an unbelievable mentor, Korzynowski. Like he was 4-time Olympic gold medalist, and he was so open. Like it worked both ways. He wanted to learn English, and we wanted to learn how to be a talker in the world. And he was really open with the training, and like everything was predicated on your pace, your heart rate, and your lactates. So in an altitude camp, we were taking lactates all the time. So basically, after every key session, every morning session for the first week. So if your lactic is over 2 on any of your sessions for the first 7 days, you're going too strong. So basically, by day 7 and day 10, when you're meant to be training hard at altitude, you won't be able to do it if you spent the first 5 days with your lactic at 3 or 3.5. And that can, at altitude, it's such a fine line to walk, or such a fine line to train at altitude, that you need to be aware that your body takes 7 to 10 days to get acclimatized. And by day 10, you can do a good solid aerobic session. But by day 14, day 17, you need to be doing your stronger, quicker work. You know, your strength, endurance, your speed. And if you don't do the first 7 days correctly, then you won't be able to do that on day 10 and day 14.
Gotcha. And for the listeners, you know, those lactates you're talking about, that's the concentration of acidosis or lactate in the blood that you take, and that be with field testing, where you do a pinprick and blood comes out, and then you'll take it and read that off the millimole reader or the lactate reader. Yeah.
And basically, what you're doing is, it's like, I would have done treadmill tests for physiologists for VO2 maxes and all that, but if you're at altitude and you're taking your heart rate, your pace, and your lactate every day, you're actually doing that in the field as much all the time, and you're getting you're able to giving you a much better meter to see how your training is going, exactly what you're doing, because your heart rates, your pace, and your lactate, 3 of them combined, gives you a huge amount of information so that you can adapt your training to it, like, you know.
Yeah, so you've got your heart rates, your blood profiles, and your recovery to decide what to do the next day if you follow the program, or you take an extra day recovery.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. And yeah, I mean that's obviously a key part of a high performance athlete, and the lactate profiles, etc. And I dare say that you're still doing these lactate tests with the athletes you're working with now.
Well, with the senior athletes, absolutely, yeah, senior athletes. So like my guys, one of them has been, my Polish athlete has been in South Africa for the last 2 months, and my South African athlete has been in Canada in the winter. So he's been training in his basement on a treadmill because he'd had minus 25, minus 35 a few days, and he can't go out. So it's really important that he's in a basement. It's an enclosed environment. You're actually going to be respiring a lot more in that environment. So even though it's minus 30 outside, he's training in 20 degrees or 22 degrees inside. So he's taking lactates on a treadmill with the heart rate, because your pace is going to be different. It's been a really interesting 3 months, because we've been trying to get him ready. Like he actually set an African record 2 weeks ago trying to qualify for Tokyo, and he's like absolutely flying. But he did three months December, January, February, up till about the 10th of March on a treadmill most of the time in his basement because the weather outside was bad, you know. So we did some really interesting sessions that we did to try and keep his mind, fresh, because like for 50K, a lot of the time you, in a base period of 12, 16 weeks, like we were doing, you try and do 3, maybe 4 40Ks, as in like just shy of a marathon, 25 miles, as a session for endurance. Between, like, you try and mix it in with your strength endurance sessions, like. But I wasn't going to make him do 40K in a treadmill, so we were sort of doing 20K in a treadmill in the morning, and then breaking it up by doing repetitions in the evening. So trying to get him activated, so he's tired, that we got the fatigue factor there, but try and make it some bit interesting for him, you know. So it was a strange build up, but it worked really well. It was very, very interesting, throwing different things, because the thing is, there's no correct way to train, no correct, oh, this is the magic formula, and every athlete is different, and every year is different for every athlete. So for me, it's trying to find what was going to work best for him, get him to the start line in the best shape possible, when we had to do most of the stuff by being inside on the treadmill, you know.
Yeah, I mean, on that one, I think I stayed with a coach in Oregon a few years ago, Bob Gray. I think his daughter was just starting race walking. She was trying to qualify for the 2012 Olympics. And he said he did a lot of sessions on the treadmill to increase her cadence. And he said it worked quite well. And she did qualify for the Olympics. So, yeah, those treadmill sessions have a massive benefit. I guess if the coach is present as well, or you've got video footage to analyse technique, cadence, and also, you know, keep tabs on. Well, it's easy to keep tabs on the pace because you've got a treadmill doing it for you. And I dare say there'll be times when you'll do lactate tests when somebody's in such an environment yourself, which is.
Yeah. Well, he was, like, the thing is, he was in the middle of build-up period for 50K, so he's taking his lactates 3-4 times a week. He was taking his lactics for every key session. So he was doing it on the treadmill himself.
Right, that's the 21st century. And how does the technology compare these days with what you were using back in, I guess, the late 90s, early 90s?
It's a different world. It's like the first time we would have gone away in training camps, we would have been spending 300-400 euros on phone calls home, whereas now you do everything for free on Skype or on Zoom or WhatsApp. So it's a very different world, you know.
For sure. Moving on to Jamie Costin as a coach now. What are your main coaching processes? And you've touched on these already in terms of race walking specific and lactate testing with the better athletes. But particularly thinking about those in the 17 to 22, what coach factors or processes do you focus on? Maybe 2 or 3 points.
Well, the most important thing is you need to know the athlete's history. So the first thing I'd be doing is asking for their training diary from the previous couple of years, and then just working from there. And it's like, so if you find out what their goals are, what they want to do, what they want to achieve, whether it's win a national 1500 meters, whether it's win, you know, whatever they're doing, whatever sport, whatever event they're doing, or if it's a 5K walk or 10K walk or 800 meters, 1500, it's like going, right, so what do you want to do? You want to run 4 minutes? Well, let's work from where you are now, 4:15, 4:20, and build a program that's going to get the athletes to where they should be. So it's specific for every athlete. It's different for every athlete, and it's just try and mold, plan around what their goals are, and how you can try and find the best way to make them achieve.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you as a coach, what are you focusing on to develop as a coach? You know, I mean, we never stop learning, and I dare say, obviously, you've masters of experience, and as you say, there's been 1 or 2 mistakes along the road, particularly as a younger man. But what are you working on to improve as a coach?
I'm a curious person. I'm always asking questions. So for me, it's try to. So last December, Mark, the South African guy, comes to me with hey, I'm stuck in Canada. I can't go anywhere. It's a pandemic. He can't go back to South Africa to train. His wife was pregnant. He couldn't leave Canada, go to San Diego or go to Mexico or whatever. So I'm stuck here. So how do we manage the situation? You know, so basically it's trying to work from all the knowledge, experience we've gained over the years, And like even something small, a guy called Valentin Kanonen, he was world champion in 1995. Craig Barrett, we'd have talked to him a few times, but Craig Barrett, he was a Finnish guy, and he used to stay at home for a lot of the winter, go to South Spain sometimes. But when he was at home in winter, he had to train on the treadmill. So he used to do these block sessions on the treadmill, where he was putting the treadmill up to 8%, so doing a K at 1% and a K at 8% gradient. Started trying to do a variated hill session, and that got me curious. We actually did those sort of sessions a few times with Craig Barrett, which were a little bit crazy because it was 25 degrees outside and we were inside in the gym on the treadmill. So you don't always make the most sensible choices, but the thing is that you learn from everything, you know. And for me, it was a case of how do I apply the knowledge that I have actually when we're in a situation where Mark won't be able to leave the house for 14 days in a row. He might get one day where he can get out. And how do we manage his training load? How do we make it an appropriate training load and get him to start line 50K and get him to start line, and he did bloody African record. So it worked, but it was very unconventional. So for me, I'm always open to doing things differently. Every athlete reacts to different stimulus. Every athlete has one speed session will work with one athlete, absolutely won't work with another one. You know, so you've got to be aware that you've got to be flexible as a coach. And I suppose that's the most important thing. Know what the sort of philosophy of training is, what you're trying to achieve, but be willing to move around it. You know, be willing to change what you're doing a bit, so that once you're not falling outside what your philosophy of training is, once you stick with your principles, there's a lot of room for movement. So for me, I'd always be trying to learn that way. And like it's all, so as an athlete, you're in training camp, maybe 4 or 6 months of the year in training camp. So whether it was in Pontremo with Paula Radcliffe and Gary Locke, whether it was Zabo, whoever you were with, the Polish runners, the Polish 8 and 1500 meter runners, spend a lot of time with those as well. So for me, like, and I'm still sort of dealing like Polish athlete I have I'm dealing with Chris Agustin, and I'm dealing with Tomasz Lewandowski, Marcin's brother. So he's the coach of Marcin, you know. So for me, I'd be chatting to these people, not all the time, but you'd be chatting to them, and if you need to something get done, especially like from a selection point of view with my athletes, you have to talk to the high performance people in those countries. And when you're chatting, chat about training, chat about their philosophy of this stuff as well. You know, so I'd always be talking to people. I'd always be trying to learn a bit more.
Gotcha. Making use of the high performance sounding boards that you've got out there and the connections you've made over the years. Perfect. Yeah. In terms of your support crew, obviously, I mean, you're quite self-sufficient and you had to be yourself as an athlete, but now as a coach, do you still tap into support networks? And particularly, I'm thinking about maybe physiologists, biomechanists, and you've mentioned some of the coaches you chat to.
Yeah, absolutely. So depending, so I haven't had an Irish athlete for a good while, but recently I started coaching a young Irish athlete, and so I'm back dealing with Jackie Frayne again. So there's, you know, like in South Africa, I've a high performance manager there that I have to deal with. I'm going to be talking to him again later because we're trying to arrange another race. And in Poland, then it's Chris Agustin, Tomasz Lewandowski. In South Africa, it's Ziki Zabeng, and in Ireland, it's Jackie at the minute. You know, so there's always people like the strength and conditioning people I'd be calling, chatting about different things if we wanted to do something in a program. Physiologists, I did a lot of studies down in the AIS, so I know the physiologists down there pretty well. And so if there's anything we're doing, say, like obviously with maybe a drinks protocol for 50K or for 20K, especially when you're going to a place like Sapporo, what sort of sessions are we going to be doing to try and imitate what the 30, 35 degrees, which very high humidity is going to be like for athletes, and what drinking strategies we need to employ to make sure that they're fully hydrated over the race. So I'd be using a vast network of people that lucky enough that they talk to me, you know.
And thinking about race walkers and strength and conditioning, how much strength and conditioning do you and your athletes do usually? And again, I'm particularly thinking about these 17 to 22-year-olds because that's
once, twice a week.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you can generic stuff, mostly body weight stuff. You don't need to be putting on weight. As an athlete, I was 70, 72, obviously a lot lighter back when I was an athlete. I was 70, 72 kilos when I was racing. But the thing is, if I went into a gym and started lifting weights, I'd actually put on muscle mass, which I didn't need to do. So all of my, like Martina McCarthy was my strength conditioning coach, and Martina is unbelievable. And Like Martina, so basically I went to Martina and said, this body needs to be strong enough to do 50K. All these muscles need to move for 4 hours, 3 hours 50, and be able to do the same firing action at the end as you start. Because my technique needs to be the same. And that's what Martina's do. And she worked out a program for me that was fantastic and worked really well. And once I started working with Martina, I actually never got injured after that.
Excellent. And then that's gold dust, that, isn't it? It
Yeah,
works,
absolutely.
you get injured. Yeah.
You know, so I like, I have huge respect for Martina. She had unbelievable knowledge and really, really, really good eye for technique and doing things correctly. So just doing, again, going back to procedure, process, it's like doing things correctly, repeating it works. Doing them incorrectly, you end up injured.
Yeah, and we don't want that. That's the last thing we want.
Mm.
What about tapering and peaking for a competition? What are your key areas? Maybe 3 priorities. And I'm thinking, particularly, you know, for a major competition, what would it be?
I suppose like everything would be geared around Olympics or World Championships or Europeans, depending.
Would that be a 1 week, 2 week, or a 3 week taper?
Well, it wouldn't be that specific. Sort of what you're doing is you'd be building in recovery periods at different stages through the year. And like if normally you'd be coming down from altitude a month before the major championship, so that you get your 4 or 5 days recovery after altitude in a block of 2.5 weeks. And I suppose you're talking it's like taper is what is a taper? Like you still have to be activated. Your body still has to know what the distance is. So like it wouldn't be unnormal to be doing a 30 or 35K progressive 10 days before 50, you know, so you'd be coming down from that obviously, but 10 days beforehand you do need to be doing something to keep your body activated, your body aware, knowing that it's got to do a race. So for me, tapering, there'd be very few races you taper for, but doing a big session 2 days before race if you knew that you needed that to be the race, you know.
So like, that would be
for instance, Bashir, you asked me about my 10K PB. I did a 40K at altitude 7 days before that race. So I did a marathon 7 days before the 10K race. Just a training like at 2 millimole lactate, 145, 150 heart rate. So training correctly, but still had that. And I was coming off probably a month of 550K, 500, maybe 600 kilometers. So I pretty much did that race without any taper. Right.
Yeah, that's. And then how do you find it recovering from a 50K or a 40K? Is that like a 2 week recovery? Is it a 3 week recovery, or is it a 3 month recovery? Or...
You can just about get away with doing 2 of them in a season, like running a marathon. If you need a 16-week break between them. You know, if you've got any less than that and you race it at 100%, then you're going to find it tough. You know, so for me, it's like the guys raced 50K there 2 weeks ago. It's March 20th. Next race is August the 8th, which is another 17 weeks. You know, so that's where that'll be the period that you look at between 50Ks, 5Ks, 10Ks. Like it's just think of middle distance running and moving up to the marathon. Pretty similar.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if the impact was quite the same with the footfall being much less walking and.
Well, it's 50K is a tough event. It's 31 miles. It's a long bloody way. So if you're racing that at 100%, like the thing is, you can train and do your 40K. Like I said, the 40K I did 8 days before that 10K was under 2 millimoles lactate, so it wasn't done at 100%.
Yeah.
Do 50K at 100%, you're going to hurt your body.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I was making, that you know, that 40K before, it wasn't flat out, and hence because it wasn't flat out, you recovered much quicker. And I think
absolutely,
yeah. But my experience on the running is that it depends when you start hurting. So if I start hurting in a marathon at 11 miles, you know, I've still got 15 miles to go. That's a lot of hurting, and ultimately with that hurting and fight and struggle, it's going to take a long time to recover. But then I've won marathons, and I've been doing this at the end, and of course I've recovered a lot quicker. But that's because I was under control. But when I'm not under control and, you know, I'm losing, I'm working hard and still not winning, then I'm battering my body, and that's what's taking the time to recover it. And I'm thinking that's what you're saying with race walking as well. Is that fair?
it's the same thing. Like most of the training is like you're training like a middle distance runner. You know, so that's same philosophy. Physiology is physiology, but you know, so it's like what will work for race walking will work for running.
Yeah.
It's just you just got the technical point in it, like a 100-meter hurdler. It's got to get over the barrier.
Yeah.
They're sprinting 100 meters. You know, so there's the technical aspect involved. That's just the way. It's just the difference in it.
Gotcha. And final question is: as a coach, as an athlete, how did you wind down? How did you relax? What do you do in between all of the training and coaching?
Really,
And farming.
Farming. So basically, I have a wife and 2 kids who were not in the house, not happy that I'm taking over the kitchen. So how I wind down. It's normal, you know. It's like what does that mean now in a pandemic? You know, it's just like what do you do? Go out for a meal, go for pints. You know, you can't do that at the minute. So for me, I just enjoy life, enjoy living.
Yeah, no, quite right. Yeah, make most of quality time, quality people, and yeah, with you 2 young ones growing, I guess they're changing week by week, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Jamie Costin, thanks ever so much for doing this. There's lots of gold dust that's come out of here, and I'm sure that race walkers and people thinking about race walking will be inspired, and hopefully we'll see them on the Olympic team over the next few years. Whether they will replicate your legacy of 3 Olympics, we'll have to wait and see. But thank you very much, Jamie.
Thanks for having me, Bashir.
Absolute pleasure. Stop this recording.
Totally.